The next thing we are going to tackle is who was Adonizedek or Melchizedek. You will see why it was so important for them to remove certain books out of the Old Testament. Because if you really knew who this man really was, it would have changed your whole perspective on the New Testament. The name of Melchizedek was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Melchizedek is mentioned only twice in the Tanakh but was most likely understood as a messianic type before the time of Jesus. In Hebrews, the author is very specific in writing that Jesus as Messiah was a priest after the order of Melchizedek and not from the Aaronic, Levitical order, which they plagiarized. He is mentioned in Genesis 14:18-20. We read that he brought wine and bread and gave it to Abraham. He blessed Abraham and in turn Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. He appears again in Psalms 110, "For the Lord has sworn and will not repent, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." We will explain Psalms 110:4 a little bit later. In the book of Hebrews, this man appears again in chapter 5, chapter 7:22. At first glance, we see that his name is really a title meaning King of Righteousness in the same way that Elizabeth is the Queen of England. Elizabeth is her name and Queen of England is her title. He is a priest who receives tithes from Abraham, so he and Abraham are contemporaries. He is obviously a person of great honor, for Abraham treats him with deep respect. Wait for it, here it comes. So who was this man and why did Abraham treat him with such high esteem? In the Hebraic book of Jasher 16:11-12, Joshua 10:13 and 2 Samuel 1:18 mentions this book. More is told about Melchizedek. And Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, the same was Shem, went out with his men to meet Abram and his people with bread and wine, and they remained together in the valley of Melech. And Adonizedek blessed Abram, and Abram gave him a tenth from all that he had brought from the spoil of his enemies, for Adonizedek was a priest before God. Quote, Abram tithed to Melchizedek because he was a priest. How did he become a priest? He is not a Levite, for there were no tribes up to this point. But Jasher does say that this priest is Shem. The book of Jasher also records the fact that Shem was Abram's Torah teacher. Jasher 9:5-6, and when Abram came out of the cave, he went to Noah and his son Shem, and he remained with them to learn the instruction of the Lord and his ways, and no man knew where Abram was, and Abram served Noah and Shem his son for a long time. And Abram was in Noah's house 39 years, and Abram knew the Lord from 3 years old, and he went in the ways of the Lord until the day of his death, as Noah and his son Shem had taught him. It would be of special interest to interject here that before the flood Shem lived in the area of Iraq and Abram was from next door in Ur of the Chaldees. Shem would have returned to this familiar area after the flood and there met Abram, who was a young boy. Shem later traveled to Canaan. God called Abram to go to the land of Canaan, where he would reunite with Shem and learn about the one true God. Abraham paid tithes to Shem because he had been his Torah teacher and priest. Hebraic literature and history maintains a certainty that this figure from another world, another age, was none other than Shem. Neither he nor his parents were born after the flood, so we see a Jewish idiom in the phrase, "He was without father or mother," Hebrews 7:3. This means that there was no written record of who he was. The records were all destroyed in the flood. If we trace the footsteps of Shem through Canaan in the book of Jasher, we see that he lives a life of godliness and righteousness. Shem lived to be 600 years old, being 98 at the time of the flood. When Abram was born, Shem was 390 years old. When Isaac was born, Shem would have been 490 years old, about 1721 BCE. When Jacob was born, Shem was 550 and he died when Jacob was 50 years old. If my calculations are correct, Abraham was born 352 years after the flood, so that Shem died when Abraham was about either 148 or 150. Shem not only outlived Abraham, but he lived to see both Isaac and Jacob born. Shem lived to be 600 years old. Shem is known in ancient writing as a teacher of righteousness. His wanderings can be traced from Mount Ararat to Shechem in Canaan, where he taught the Gentiles in that area. Genesis 12:6. Abra comes on the scene in Canaan, and he traveled as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at SHEM, where the Lord would appear to him and announce, "To your seed I will give this land." So Abram built an altar there. The significance of the great tree of Moreh is that it was the place to come to be taught by the great teachers. They were the school sites. Shem is the Moreh. Moreh means, in Hebrew, teacher. Who is this great teacher? Abram went to the site of the great teacher to learn. It was most likely Shem who named the great mountain range of Jerusalem Moriah, the place of the teacher. Moriah was the city where Shem was king, teacher and priest. The name of the city was Salem and later became known as Jerusalem. The ancient Jerusalem Targum in its commentary of Genesis 14:18 states that Shem was Melchizedek. Also, in the Midrash on Psalm 37:126b, Shem is referred to as Melchizedek, who came forth safely from the ark. When Moses summons Israel to prepare them to follow Joshua into Canaan, he mentions Shem indirectly due to 11:30. Several legends surround Shem that is not provable. He wore the same garments that God had made for Adam and Eve. He was the supreme judge of Salem, where he oversaw the Beth Din, house of judgment. The book of Jasher can be found online and it is wonderful reading. Web links. Book of Jasher, biblical references, the book of Jasher also spelled Jasher, Hebrew. Transliteration, Sefer HaYeser, which means the book of the upright or the book of the just man, is an apocryphal book mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. I was about to call it a night, but I remembered that I was going to break down Psalms 110:4. I get lazy just like anyone else, so I decided to pull the verse off the internet until I discovered that the Hebrew verse that was on the internet was not in line with the Torah that I have in my possession. So I was wide awake after that. They deliberately left out a very key part, and it reads, "A rightful king by my decree." Now we all know that there was only one king that the Most High Power made a decree with. This is the trickery that they play on the mind. So I took the liberty of posting the verse that I have. Psalms 110, "For the Lord hath sworn, and will not repent, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." Now to understand Psalms 110:4 you must first read Psalms 89 and Psalms chapters 2.
Genji